the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Lindsey Salatka. Lindsey, welcome to the Florida Writer Podcast. Could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. I am a fiction writer. I love writing fiction. I do also write short memoir pieces that I've had published in several anthologies, but I really focus on writing fiction. It's my favorite.
You've recently published a book called Fish Heads and Duck Skin. I've got to ask about the title.
Yeah. I was surprised actually that the publisher accepted my title, but I was pleased because it actually comes from a real incident in my time when I lived in Shanghai. So the book is loosely based on my time living in Shanghai with my family. And my oldest daughter, who at the time was 4, and now she's 20. So, but when she was 4, we were at a Chinese restaurant, and we'd just gotten there, and I was really struggling with finding foods that I could eat because I was picky. And she turned to me at the dinner table and said, "Mom, my favorite foods are fish heads and duck skin." And it really I was like, "Can you say that again for your dad?" So I made her say it a few times because I just couldn't believe that it actually had come out of her mouth and that she meant it, but she did. And the thing that I think the biggest takeaway for me from that was that, we had just landed in this place that felt very foreign. And here she was completely embracing it in every way. And, a year earlier, she would have said her favorite foods were mac and cheese and pizza, And so I just loved that she was so easily able to accept the food and the life in another place. So there you have it.
Did you write a memoir or a novel?
It is a novel. It started actually as a memoir, and then there were just too many things about it that I didn't want. So I was basically pregnant the entire time we lived in Shanghai. We were there for 5 years, and I had 2 kids while I was there. And I didn't want it to be about a pregnant woman in Shanghai. I just felt like that was I don't know. That wasn't really the story I wanted to tell. So I just made it a novel and dialed up the characters and added a lot. And so it's a novel, but it is loosely based on my life in Shanghai.
What was it like living in Shanghai?
It was great. It was difficult the first couple of years, adjusting to a different culture. But, once we got the lay of the land, it was wonderful. It was very difficult to leave. My kids, still have a soft spot for China. They still want to go all the time. They still speak Mandarin. So, it stayed with us. Let's say it was definitely a challenge in the beginning, and then it was, someplace that will never leave us. It's part of us.
That's really interesting, and it's exciting when you can live in another environment that's outside of your own experience. And when we're adults, particularly, it's such an adjustment. I've spent time overseas as well, and it's not easy, but it's exciting and it's different, and you really need to pay attention. But it's such a great, it's really great fodder for the muse.
I definitely agree. I mean, there were so many stories I felt like I had to tell. Actually, I started writing this book when I lived there. So I spent 10 years on it. But I started when I was there because I felt like, 2 things. I felt like I have new eyes, and I could tell that my eyes were getting used to what I was seeing. So I wasn't noticing things that stood out to me in the beginning. And so I thought I really have to write this down while I'm noticing, while I have new eyes and I can see everything. And I can think, oh my gosh, this is so different from life at home. And I also wanted to just memorialize everything so my kids would know what it was like when they were little. because I wasn't sure, that they would remember any of it. And so I wanted them to know, some of the things that we would see on a daily basis that were just, part of our world.
Do you have other stories based on this time period?
I do. Not everything made the book, but I don't know that I have so many things. I'm trying to think if I have anything that's published. I wrote a couple pieces that were published when I was in Shanghai that aren't in the book. I don't have anything that I can refer people to reading. I think right now it's just all in the book.
I'm going to go ahead and ask, with the whole COVID situation and then having had the background and experience of living in Shanghai, did you have a different sense of what was going on in the world compared to your neighbors in the United States?
Definitely had a different perspective. So I think, well, first of all, the news in China, and I think it still is, but I'm speaking about, 2004, 2005, basically until 2010 when I was there. The news in China is heavily censored. So, if I was at the gym looking at a story about India, all of a sudden the screen would go black for 5 minutes until that segment was over. Like they only get so certain pieces of information. So I think, there's a lot going on there with access to news and obviously social media, and there are ways around it. But the perspective that you get from being overseas is something that you can't replicate if you never leave home. And it's so you can't even really describe it. And I think that was part of why I had such a tough time when I repatriated, when I moved back to the US. I just couldn't have a conversation with somebody. Like we were just coming from such different places, even just the topics of interest, or, I think their eyes would glaze over when I was talking about my life in Shanghai, because they just couldn't relate. And it just didn't matter, which I don't have a problem with that. It's just, I now had a completely different experience that wasn't really relevant to anybody but me and other people that had been in similar spaces. So, I had to kind of seek out people that had similar experience to myself. And that took a while, but yeah, so I would say, the perspective, as if you've spent time overseas, it's just not the same. I really recommend anybody to spend some time overseas, just so you can understand that, we do come from with a very American lens. And when I moved to China, I would say my lens was extremely American. I didn't even know it was, we don't necessarily know that we're so American until we get somewhere. And then we just, or at least I just assumed like everybody wanted to be like us, or wanted to, kind of looked up to us. And, in some ways that's true, I think, but in other ways it's really not true. There are other wonderful places in the world and everybody does it a little differently. So
tell me about writing. And you said you did publish a little bit while you were there. Did you have a different type of writing routine? You had little kids. I understand that, but was it different? Did it, this was, kind of early internet, which wasn't that long ago, which really scares me when I say that. But, we didn't have quite the social media that we have now. So how did you navigate the publishing and the publishing world while you were overseas?
Actually, I published there. So I was writing for the expat magazine. So yeah, everything I wrote was specifically for China. And then actually I did write a newsletter that I would email home to. Blogs had just started. It was still a very like uncomfortable word to put in your mouth. It's like blog. What the heck is a blog? But so I didn't have one. I had a newsletter and I would email it to all my friends, just describing, and my family, describing my life in Shanghai. We lived in Bali also for 2 years before we moved to Shanghai. So that's where the newsletter started. And then it continued when I was in Shanghai. So I saved some of that just as research for my book. But it wasn't, I don't think I took any scenes from the newsletter necessarily. it just sort of was a reminder of how it felt to be there.
It's like journaling, really.
Yes, exactly. Public journaling.
Public journaling. That's right. That's right. Well, that's what I have a personal blog, and that's what it is a public journal
Yeah,
of
like
my
it. I love it.
idiosyncrasies. Anyone who wants to know about what it's like to be Alison, you can go find it on AlisonNissen.com. But
okay, good. I'll go. I'll check it out.
And then, I just write when the muse hits me. So, and I've been working on my own project. So I haven't put as much time into the blog lately, but it's still there and something will come out of it soon, I'm sure. Anyway,
yeah.
How long did it actually take you to write Fish Heads and Duckskin when you got serious about it?
Yeah, I put it down several times. I would say I started probably 6 years. I didn't measure because it was, there were just so many points where, I started a writing group in about 2012, and then I would bring chapters in and get feedback. And then at one point I said, okay, I have to decide if this is a memoir or it's fiction. And everybody voted memoir in my writing group. And I was like, I usually like to go with the consensus, but I got to go with my gut. I'm feeling this as a novel, and I'm so glad I did it that way. And so yeah, I would say 6 years. Even that was a little bit on and off because I would take breaks, but I have to say that breaks are part of the writing process because I think I would come back to it with fresh eyes and be able to go so much quicker than if I had just plodded along the entire time. At least for me, as much as a break can be frustrating, like when you're not feeling it or you're blocked or whatever, and then you step away, I find that frustrating, but I always go back and think, aha, that's why I needed the break, So yeah, 6 years, all part of the process.
Well, I like the conversation about novel versus memoir. I'm reminded of James Fry, Million Little Pieces. He published it as a memoir when it was mostly a memoir, but there were parts of it that were fictionalized or sensationalized. I'm not sure which. And that does take what you've put on paper to a new realm. The idea of creating it as a novel gives you so much more freedom.
Definitely. A lot more freedom. And also that, it's a story of a family in Shanghai, and my family wanted to know how they were portrayed, and as you would. And it was great to say, you know what, it's not really you. It's, I dialed everybody up or changed them. I made them fictional characters because I didn't want to have to think about what I was going to say later to make them feel better about portraying them, because no matter how you portray somebody, it's always going to feel wrong to them, it's just part of life. So for me, it was just an easier way to have people in the story that weren't actually in the story, but they were a little bit in the story. The main character was a little bit me. So yeah, it's what do they call it? Autofiction. That's the genre that they're calling it, although there is not a place in the bookstore for that. Autofiction is autobiographical fiction. So yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are doing it. But it is a tricky one. At least it started that way when people were still calling things memoir, but they weren't exactly that.
Yeah, I've written memoirs as a ghostwriter for other people, and it is tricky because you want to paint the sky and you want to, show the forest. You want the smell of the ocean. It may or may not have been quite that salty. You just don't really know, but it's those details, and how far you can push the limit. Auto memoir, I'm going to have to keep that one in mind.
Autofiction. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think honestly, even any fiction there's a little nugget of truth in any piece of fiction, right? Because we have to pull from somewhere. So, but autofiction is maybe a little closer to the truth than like the book I'm writing now, for example, that is really not about anybody that I know. It's just people that I can imagine.
And what are you working on now?
I am working on another novel, but I'm very early on.
Is it also about China, or?
This one is all happening in the United States. I'm keeping it simple. And I'm writing about sports parents because I'm dealing with that a lot as a mom. Excuse me. So yeah, it's actually quite fun to write. I'm just imagining like how crazy can crazy get, which is so fun.
Oh yes. I was a sports kid, and then my sister's a total traveling sports family, and it's just insane what they do, where they go, how they get there, the stories, the hotels, the sharing, the car rides, the whole thing. So it is. And then the emails and the text change that will go through, and she will often interrupt a conversation that we're having. Hold on, I've got this problem. She has to go deal with.
I feel like there is endless, excuse me. I feel like there's endless fodder. It's amazing. Like, I actually just turned in an essay about it to the Moms Who Don't Have Right blog. It hasn't been published yet, but I just feel like every time I go to any sports game, I travel a lot with my daughter. So there's just so much material. It's like, and not because people are doing it wrong. It's just like this. We're trying to do the best for our kids, but we sort of lost sight of, what we're actually doing. If that makes sense. So I feel like I could write it. I could write 10 books about it, but, and that's really just where the book starts. It goes in a different direction. It's always about there. I love to write about the search for self, because I feel like, that also has endless material, because when are we ever satisfied with who we are? I think we have moments of satisfaction, but really we're always searching. So, or at least I am. So I love to write about that. And in the realm of parenting, especially parenting when you're dealing with like kids, competitive kids, and how you parent that. Are you creating more stress? How are you doing that? How are you creating that tension? How are you creating that stress? Or how are you trying to lessen the stress? It's all the stuff that, you can watch anybody do it and think like, oh my gosh, why are they doing that way? But then when you turn the mirror on yourself, I'm sure people are like, whoa, she's crazy. I'm certain that I'm just as guilty as the next guy, but I just find it, fascinating. So, and also it's less frustrating, I think, when you watch it as though you're going to use it later than if you're actually watching it because you're living it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if you're living it, you're like, what the heck's wrong with the world? But if you're watching, you're like, oh, that's a good one.
Well, Lindsey Salatka, how can people get in touch with you?
Let's see. I'm on Instagram at my what lovely gills you have. That is my tag. I'm also on Twitter at Lindsey Salatka, and Facebook at Fish Heads and Duck Skin. So those are the best ways to reach me. And actually, I also put a newsletter out. If anybody's interested, you can sign up at my website, which is lindseysalatka.com. And that's where I say what work I have that's coming out, whether it's in an anthology or a performance or a novel. And if anybody wants me to come to their book club, that's how they would reach me as well.
Well, awesome.
So thank you so much.
Lindsey, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yes, totally.
What do you do with boxes that come to your house via Amazon or some other type of mail delivery service?
You mean every day when a box comes to my house? I break it down and put it in recycling. Like the extra boxes you're saying, or yeah. I break it down. I'm such a freak about the environment. So I take all the packing materials and I save them for when I have to pack things up. And that my husband is like, seriously, Lindsay, like you're making yourself crazy. And then I recycle the boxes unless I think I'm going to need them at some point, and then I'll save them. But you can only save so many. A lot more come in than go out.
Do you have a favorite saying?
Oh boy. That is such a good question. I'm sure my kids will be like, yeah, you always say this. I guess you get what you give. That's a good one. But
and will you drink plain water, or do you need flavored beverage in order to drink it?
I will drink plain water all the time. I drink it all day long. I love tea though. Tea is my weakness, but not sweetened.
Just a nice iced tea.
Yep. Hot, iced, whatever it is.
Is that from China? Is that from your love of when you were there, or did you like tea beforehand?
I loved tea before then, but I actually grew to obsess with tea when I was there. So yeah, I have a great, and now I only drink Chinese tea. So, well, I mean, unless I'm going to Starbucks or something, but I do have a great appreciation for nice tea. So, and nice Chinese tea, mostly green tea. Yeah.
Well, Lindsey Salatka, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo! We're all done. Lindsey Salatka is an author, ghostwriter, and editor. Her writing has been featured at Blog Her and in Shanghai Family Magazine, among others. She is on the advisory board of the San Diego Writers Festival and serves as director of the Kids Write Children's Writing Contest. You can find more information on Lindsey on Instagram at My What Lovely Gills You Have, on Facebook at Fish Heads and Duckskin, or on Twitter at Lindsey Salatka. For more information about the Florida Writers Association and the upcoming Florida Writers Con 2022, visit floridawriters.org. Until next time.